When a world-famous pianist invited a quiet woman to play the piano just for fun, no one expected her to leave the entire room, speechless, and change her life forever. It was a quiet afternoon in a small town not many people talked about. The streets were calm, the air was fresh, and the world seemed to be in no rush. Somewhere near the corner of a narrow street there was a little cafe. It wasn't very big, but it was loved by the locals. The wooden chairs made a little noise when moved. The coffee always smelled warm. And in one corner stood an old piano with a few scratches on it, but it still held a strange kind of charm. Not many people played it anymore. It was more like decoration now, something that reminded people of the past. On that very afternoon, a man walked into the cafe. He looked tired, wearing dark glasses, a simple jacket, and a cap pulled low over his face. No one really paid attention to him except the owner behind the counter. Her eyes widened for a second, but she quickly looked down and didn't say a word. She knew who he was, the world-famous pianist everyone adored. His face had been in newspapers, on concert posters, and on every TV channel just a few weeks ago. But it seemed like he didn't want to be noticed right now. Maybe he was hiding. Maybe he just wanted peace. The owner respected that and acted as if he was just another guest. The man chose a corner table near the piano and sat down quietly. He ordered a black coffee and looked around the place. It was simple, cozy, and calm, just what he needed. Had been traveling for weeks, performing in big cities, surrounded by crowds, lights, and noise. But today, he didn't want applause, didn't want fans or cameras. He just wanted a moment where no one expected anything from him. At the other side of the room, a woman sat alone at a table. She looked to be in her late 40s or early 50s. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and she wore a plain sweater and jeans. There was something soft in her face, something gentle. She was stirring her tea slowly, looking outside the window from time to time. She seemed like someone who had lived a life full of routines, someone who knew how to stay quiet and smile at little things. No one in the cafe knew her name, but everyone had seen her around. She came often, always sitting at the same table, humming softly to herself. Sometimes lost in thought, the man noticed her too. There was something peaceful about her. She wasn't talking to anyone, just sitting there, her fingers tapping lightly on the table, almost like they were dancing to some invisible music. He watched for a while, then smiled faintly and looked away. A few minutes passed, his coffee arrived, and he sipped it slowly. The piano in the corner seemed to call to him. It had been days since he played just for himself, not for a crowd, not for money, just for fun. He stood up slowly, walked over to the piano, and opened the lid. Some people turned to look, curious. The cafe wasn't used to live music anymore. The woman at the table looked up, and their eyes met for a brief second. He smiled politely, and she gave a small smile back. He sat down and placed his fingers gently on the keys. At first, he didn't play anything special. It's just a simple tune. Soft, gentle. It was a melody almost like a whisper, something that blended into the hum of the cafe. But it made people pause. The man at the counter stopped cleaning a cup. A young couple near the window leaned in to listen. Even the woman at the table stopped stirring her tea, her eyes focused on the piano. The notes touched something deep inside her. After playing for a few minutes, he laughed softly and turned to the people. "Anyone else want to try?" he said playfully. Most people smiled and shook their heads. They knew who he was now. A few started whispering to each other. The woman kept watching him, her eyes now curious. The man looked at her and raised an eyebrow. "How about you?" he asked, smiling again. "You look like someone who knows music." The woman's face turned slightly red, and she laughed nervously. "Oh no, I haven't played in years," she said, trying to wave him off. "That's okay," he said. Just for fun, everyone in the cafe now looked at her. She hesitated. Her heart started beating faster. She hadn't touched a piano in decades, not since she was a young girl. It had taken her in other directions: marriage, work, children. Bill's music had become a memory, something she sometimes dreamed about when she couldn't sleep. But now, someone had asked, not just anyone, a world-famous pianist. She stood up slowly. Her hands were trembling a little. People clapped softly, encouraging her. She walked over to the piano like someone walking into the past. The man stood up and gave her the seat. "Take your time," he said kindly. She sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She closed her eyes. The cafe waited in silence. Then, softly, she began to play. At first the notes were unsure, like a child learning to walk. But something inside her remembered. Her fingers started to find their way. A slow melody began to form, gentle and beautiful. It was a song filled with emotion, with memories, with pain and joy mixed together. The kind of song that didn't need words to make people feel something. The man stood beside her, stunned. The owner behind the counter froze, her eyes wide. The young couple near the window held each other's hands. The whole cafe had gone silent, not because they were forced to, but because they were drawn into something magical. The woman played as if the piano was a part of her body, as if the years had never passed. Her eyes stayed closed, but her heart opened. The music grew deeper, richer, more emotional. Some people felt a tear in their eye without understanding why. It wasn't just the notes, it was the story inside the notes. Her story. The song ended after a few minutes, but no one moved. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Then, slowly, people began to clap. Not just a polite clap, real applause, heartfelt and warm. It's the kind that says, "Thank you for showing us something beautiful." The woman looked down, shy and surprised. She hadn't expected this. She had only played for fun, but something deep had come out. The pianist leaned closer and whispered, "You've just touched everyone in this room." She smiled, a little embarrassed. "I didn't think I still had it in me," she said quietly. "You never lost it," he replied. "It was always there, just sleeping." She stood up, and people continued to clap. She returned to her table, her tea now cold, but her heart warm. The pianist sat back at his seat, watching her with deep respect. He had performed in great halls, in front of thousands, but what he saw today was something different. Something honest, something rare. Later, as the people left the cafe, many came to her and thanked her. Some asked if she was a professional. Others said she should perform more often. She just smiled and said it was just for fun. But deep inside, something had changed, and the man who invited her to the piano, he knew something powerful had just happened. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew it was only the beginning of a story no one would ever forget. The cafe was still full of quiet whispers after she returned to her seat. People were talking in low voices, still surprised by what they had just seen and heard. The woman sat with her head slightly bowed, not out of shame, but from the deep emotion she was still feeling inside. Her fingers, the same fingers that had washed dishes, folded clothes, and carried heavy grocery bags for years, had just created magic. It felt strange, it felt powerful. She picked up her cup of tea, which had gone cold now, and held it in both hands. Her heart was still racing a little. She hadn't expected that reaction from anyone. She had just followed her instinct. It had felt like something deep inside her had woken up after sleeping for many years, like a small light that had always been there, quietly burning, but forgotten. The famous pianist, still sitting nearby, kept watching her. He was not just impressed, he was stunned. This was not something he saw every day. He had performed all around the world, shared stages with some of the greatest musicians alive, but there was something different in this woman's playing. It wasn't perfect. The notes weren't always sharp, but the feeling, it was more powerful than anything he had felt in a long time. After some time, he stood up and walked slowly toward her table. "May I join you?" he asked gently. She looked up and smiled. "Of course," sat across from her, still holding the look of someone who had just seen something important. There was silence between them for a few seconds, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was a silence that held respect. "You surprised everyone," he said. "I surprised myself," she replied with a quiet laugh. "You played from your heart," he said. "That's rare, very rare." The woman gave a small nod. "Been so long since I touched a piano, I didn't think I could remember." "You didn't just remember," he said. "You created something beautiful." She looked down at the table and smiled again. "It's funny," she said softly. "When I was young, I used to dream of becoming a pianist. I played every day, for hours. But life doesn't always go the way you plan." He didn't speak, just listened. He knew there was more. "I got married when I was 20, she continued. "It wasn't a bad marriage, but it wasn't easy either. My husband worked hard. I worked too. We had 2 kids. I had to give up piano lessons, couldn't afford them anymore. Then my father got sick. I started working longer hours, and slowly. Music became something I only heard in my dreams." He nodded, understanding more with every word. "I used to keep an old keyboard in the closet," she said. "But it broke a few years ago and I never replaced it. Too many bills. Too many. Other things to take care of, and you never told anyone?" He asked. She shook her head. "What was the point? It was part of a different life. I had responsibilities. People depended on me. I couldn't sit around and wish for things." He looked at her with gentle eyes. "But you still remembered?" "Guess some things just stay inside you," she said. Waiting, he took a breath. "You played like someone who had been through a lot. I could feel it. It wasn't just music, it was your story." She smiled, but her eyes were a little wet now. "Sometimes the things you bury deepest come out when you least expect." The cafe owner came by quietly and placed a fresh cup of tea on the table in front of her. "On the house," she said warmly. "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years." The woman blushed a little and nodded. "Thank you." Other customers were still looking at her from their tables. Some had recorded her performance on their phones. A young girl came up shyly and asked if she could take a picture with her. The woman laughed and said yes, even though she had never been asked for a picture in her whole life. The famous pianist leaned back in his chair, was watching it all happen. "You know," he said, "I've met people who have trained in the best schools in the world, but they play with their heads, not their hearts. You play with both?" She looked surprised. "That means a lot coming from you." "I mean every word," he said. "You're not just good, you're rare." For a moment she didn't know what to say. Compliments were not something she was used to. Most of her life had been spent behind the scenes raising kids, working jobs, keeping everything running while others were seen and heard. And now, for the first time, she was being truly seen. She took a sip of her new tea. It tasted different. Warmer. Sweeter. He looked thoughtful. "Do you still want to play? I mean, if you had the chance again." She didn't answer right away. She looked around the cafe, at the piano, at the people smiling at her. "I think I do," she said at last. "I didn't realize how much I missed it, until today." He smiled. "Good, then don't let it go again." She said, "It's probably too late." "It's never too late," he replied quickly. "Trust me, I've seen people start at 50, 60, even 70. Music doesn't care how old you are. It only cares if you feel it." She looked at him carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because someone needs to," he said simply. "And because I think the world needs to hear you." She looked out the window again. The sun was starting to set, and the sky had turned a soft orange. Life outside looked the same, but everything inside her had changed. Something had opened a door she had closed long ago without realizing it could be opened again. He stood up. "I have to go, but I hope I see you again." She nodded. "Thank you for asking me to play." He smiled. "Thank you for saying yes." As he walked out of the cafe, people on the street turned to look at him, some finally recognizing who he was, but he didn't care. He felt lighter somehow, as if watching her play had reminded him of something important to why he loved music in the first place. Back inside the cafe, the woman sat alone again. But this time, she wasn't just a quiet woman drinking tea. She was someone who had reminded a room full of people what true beauty sounded like. When she finally stood up to leave, the cafe felt warmer than ever. She thanked the owner and walked home slowly, the cool air brushing against her face. Her steps were soft, but steady. Something inside her had shifted. And though she didn't know exactly what would come next, she felt ready for it. That night, when she got home, she looked around her small apartment. Everything looked the same couch, The same old photos, the same kitchen table. But it all felt different now. She opened a drawer and found an old notebook where she had once written songs back when she was a teenager. It was dusty, the paper yellowing, but the pages were still there, still waiting. She sat down, picked up a pen, and began to write again. Her fingers remembered the shape of the notes. Her mind remembered the rhythm. Her heart remembered the dream. And somewhere in the night, while the world outside went on as usual, a woman who had once forgotten who she was began to remember again, not just through memories, but through music. It had only been a few days since the woman played the piano at the cafe, but the memory of that moment still lived fresh in her mind. Every now and then, when she sat alone, the music would echo in her head like a soft whisper she could feel, her fingers moving even when they rested still on her lap. It felt like her soul had finally spoken after being silent for too long. She continued her usual routine, waking early, making breakfast, folding clothes, going to work at the local library. Nothing about her outer life had changed. She still walked the same streets, carried the same bag, and greeted the same neighbors, but something inside her had opened up. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a quiet shift, like the slow blooming of a flower that had waited years for the sun. At the library, a young college student approached her. "Miss Clara?" he said nervously. "I saw the video online. The one from the cafe. Was that really you?" She smiled, surprised. "Yes, that was me." His eyes widened. "You were amazing. I didn't know you could play like that." Clara chuckled gently. "I almost didn't know it myself." More people began noticing her. Not in a loud way, but they started smiling more warmly, stopping to talk a little longer. The cafe owner told her the video had been shared hundreds of times online. Some local news pages had picked it up too, calling it a surprise melody in a small-town cafe. Even a radio station called the cafe asking if they could speak to the mysterious pianist. But Clara didn't care much for attention. She wasn't trying to become famous. She wasn't even sure what she wanted, only that something had awakened inside her, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. One evening, just before closing time at the library, the door opened quietly. She looked up from the front desk and saw the same man, the famous pianist, walking in with a soft smile on his face. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "Not at all," Clara said, standing up with a surprised but happy look. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I was in town again and thought I'd stop by," he said. "I was wondering if you'd like to go for a walk." She hesitated for just a second, then nodded. "Sure." They walked side by side through the quiet evening streets. The sun was low, and the sky had a warm orange glow. He didn't speak at first, neither did she. It wasn't uncomfortable, just calm. After a while, he asked, "Did you always love music?" "Yes," she replied. "Since I was a child." "Did you learn on your own, or did someone teach you?" "My father taught me," she said softly. "He was a music teacher. We didn't have much money, but we always had a piano. He used to say, 'Even poor houses need rich sounds.'" He smiled. "That's beautiful." Clara nodded, looking ahead as they walked. "He was everything to me. When I was little, he would sit me on the bench beside him and place my hands on the keys. I remember his voice telling me, 'Let your fingers tell the story.'" He watched her face as she spoke. It was filled with a quiet emotion. It's like the pages of an old book opening again. "I was accepted to a music school when I was 18, she continued. "It was my biggest dream. I was going to move to the city and study piano professionally." "What happened?" he asked gently. She sighed. "Life happened. My mother passed away that same year. My father became sick. There was no one else to take care of him. I gave up the school offer and stayed home." "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I don't regret it," Clara said. "He gave me everything. I owed him that. But after he died, it felt like the music died too. And then I got married, started working. 2 children came, then a divorce, bills, responsibilities. One thing after another. There was never any time, never enough energy. I stopped playing altogether." They sat on a bench in the park, the night gently settling around them. Crickets chirped, and the street lamps began to glow. "I used to have a keyboard," she said after a pause, "but it broke. I couldn't afford to fix it. It was 10 years ago." He looked at her, something serious in his expression. "In all that time you didn't play at all?" "Not once," she whispered. "Not until the cafe." He leaned forward slightly. "Clara, you understand what happened that day? What we all witnessed?" She looked at him with quiet eyes. "You didn't just play the piano. You moved people," he said. "People were crying. I've performed in places where thousands clapped, but I've rarely seen a room go silent the way that cafe did when you played. You told a story through music, and it wasn't just beautiful, it was real." She smiled, but her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. That means more than I can say." Reached into his coat and pulled out a small black box. Clara looked at it, confused. "I want to give you something," he said. He opened the box slowly. Inside was a small silver pin in the shape of a grand piano. "This was given to me by my first teacher," he said. "She told me to give it to someone who reminds me of why I love music." Clara gasped. "I can't accept that." "Can, and you should," he said firmly, "because you reminded me." She stared at the pin for a long time, then reached out with trembling fingers and held it in her hand. It was heavier than it looked, full of meaning. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Just promise me something," he said. "Anything. Don't stop again." Clara nodded, her heart full. "I won't." That night, after they said goodbye, Clara walked home, holding the small black box in her hand. She felt like a new chapter had begun, even though she didn't know what the next page would hold. When she got home, she opened her old notebook again and started writing down some of the melodies still playing in her mind. This time, they came freely. She didn't care if they were perfect or not. And when she woke up the next morning, the first thing she did was walk to the local music store. It was a small shop with dusty windows and guitars hanging on the walls. The owner, an old man with kind eyes, looked up as she entered. "I'm looking for a keyboard," she said with a smile. "Something secondhand, maybe." He looked at her for a moment and then grinned. "You're the woman from the cafe, aren't you?" Clara laughed. "I suppose I am." He guided her through the shop, showing her different models. Finally, she chose one not too expensive, not too fancy, but good enough to feel like home. When she placed her hands on the keys again later that day, something inside her settled. As if a missing piece had finally returned to where it belonged. She played for hours, not to impress anyone, not for an audience, just for herself. She played songs from her childhood, old pieces her father had taught her, and new melodies that came from the feelings she had locked away for years. In the weeks that followed, her small apartment began to feel like a music room. Her neighbors would sometimes pause outside her door just to listen. Children who passed by would stop and smile. At the sound, it wasn't loud or flashy, it was gentle, deep, and true. And slowly, the word began to spread. More people in town started talking about her. One day, a woman from the local community center called, asking if she would consider teaching piano. Lessons to kids. Clara was surprised, even nervous, but she said yes. The first class had only 3 students. She was unsure at first, wondering if she still had the ability to teach. But as the children gathered around the keyboard and looked up at her with excitement, something clicked. She began with the basics, showing them how to place their hands, how to feel the rhythm. And soon she was teaching them not just music, but joy. More students joined. Parents thanked her. Some of the children even performed small songs at local events. People called her Miss Clara with respect and admiration. The community saw her not just as the quiet woman at the library, but as a teacher, a musician, and a guide. The famous pianist returned to town a month later. He visited her class quietly and watched from the back of the room as she taught. When their eyes met, they smiled at each other without needing to speak. And in that small room filled with music and laughter, both of them knew something beautiful had been reborn, not just a lost dream, but a deeper truth. That music, no matter how long it's been silent, never really leaves you. It waits, and when the time is right, it sings again. A soft wind blew through the small town, rustling the trees and brushing against the windows of the cafe where it had all started. Life seemed the same. On the outside, people walked to work, bought groceries, and shared short smiles, but something had shifted. There was a quiet buzz in the air, like the town had discovered a hidden treasure and didn't know how to contain the joy of it. The video from that day at the cafe, when Clara played the piano, was still spreading online. It had been recorded by a teenage girl sitting near the back of the cafe. She had posted it with a simple caption: "A world-famous pianist asks a random woman to play. You won't believe what happens." No one expected it to get much attention, but within hours, people started sharing it. First locals, then people from other towns, and then strangers from other countries. By the next morning, it had been viewed thousands of times. By the end of the week, millions. Clara had no idea. She wasn't on social media, didn't follow online trends, and had no interest in being famous. She only found out when the cafe owner called her one morning, almost shouting with excitement, "Clara, you won't believe it. The video has gone viral." Clara was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping tea and going through her lesson plans for her small piano class. "What video?" she asked, confused. "The one from the cafe," the owner said. The girl posted it. "It's everywhere. News outlets are talking about it. You're on the front page of a local music blog. Even a big radio station mentioned you this morning." Clara dropped her spoon. "What? That can't be right." "I'm serious," said the cafe owner. "You've become an internet star overnight." Clara sat still, unsure how to respond. The idea of the whole world watching her felt unreal. She hadn't done anything special, at least not in her eyes. She had just played a song from the heart. For her, it had been a personal, emotional moment, a performance. Later that day, when she went out to run errands, people began to stop her in the street. Some asked if she was the lady from the video. Others said they had cried watching her play. An older man took her hand and said, "You reminded me of my mother. She used to play just like that." Even children pointed and waved. "That's the piano lady." She felt overwhelmed, unsure how to react. But deep inside, she felt something else too, a strange joy. For the first time in many years, people saw her, not as someone ordinary, not as just a background figure, but as someone who had touched their lives. Within a few days, Clara began receiving phone calls and messages from journalists, musicians, and even talent agencies. Everyone wanted to know who she was, where she came from, why no one had heard of her before. The pianist, the same man who had invited her to play in the first place, called her too. "They want to talk to you on television," he said with a chuckle. "I think we've started something." Clara laughed nervously. "I didn't do anything special." "You did everything special," he said. "You were honest. People can feel that. They're drawn to it." Soon, a local TV channel invited her for a short interview. She almost said no, but the pianist encouraged her. "Just speak from the heart," he said, "like you did when you played." The interview was short, only a few minutes, but it was powerful. Clara sat on a simple chair, wearing her everyday clothes, no makeup or flashy jewelry. She told her story softly but clearly about how she had played as a child, how she gave up her dream for her family, and how she hadn't touched a piano in years until that day at the cafe. The host asked her, "Did you ever imagine this would happen?" Clara smiled. "No, I didn't even imagine I'd ever play again." The interview touched hearts all over the country. After it aired, more messages began pouring in. Strangers wrote to say she had inspired them to go back to their own dreams. Some said they had given up on music, painting, or writing, but now, after hearing Clara's story, they wanted to try again. She even received letters from people who had never played an instrument but said her music made them feel things they hadn't felt in years. One letter said, "Your music reminded me that beauty still exists in this world." But the biggest surprise came when she was invited to perform at a charity concert in the city, a large event hosted by the same pianist who had discovered her. It was a night dedicated to hope, second chances, and forgotten dreams. He wanted Clara to be the closing performance. She was speechless. "Me, at a concert. I've never played on a real stage." "You've already played on the biggest stage," he said gently. "The human heart. Rest is just lighting and sound." Clara thought long and hard before accepting. She was afraid. What if she made a mistake? What if she wasn't good enough? But a small voice inside her said something she hadn't heard in years. "You're ready?" And so she said yes. The weeks that followed were filled with preparation. She practiced every day on her keyboard. Her students cheered her on, bringing her little notes with drawings of pianos and hearts. The cafe owner even gifted her a new dress for the performance. Nothing fancy, but beautiful and simple, just like Clara. On the night of the concert, Clara stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly. The sound of the crowd filled the air. Hundreds of people, maybe more. Bright lights shone from above, and the stage looked like something from another world. The pianist came up to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No matter how many people are out there," he said, "just play. Like you're back in the cafe. Let your soul speak." She nodded, took a deep breath, and walked onto the stage. The crowd greeted her with quiet curiosity. Most had seen the video, but many were seeing her in person for the first time. She walked to the grand piano placed at the center of the stage, sat down, and closed her eyes. Then she began to play. The notes flowed gently at first, soft and warm like a lullaby wrapped in memories. Then they grew bolder, deeper, filled with emotions she had carried for years. Regret, joy, loss, love, everything poured into the music. There was no sheet music in front of her. She wasn't following notes. She was following her heart. The audience sat completely still. Not a whisper, not a cough, not even the rustle of programs. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath just to listen, when the last note faded into silence. There was a moment where no one moved, and then, suddenly, applause. Loud, powerful, rising like a wave. People stood. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others shouted her name. The applause continued for several minutes, and Clara, sitting at the piano, simply smiled. It wasn't pride, it was peace. The pianist walked out and joined her on stage. He took her hand and raised it toward the audience, and the cheers grew louder. Later that night, backstage, he told her, "That was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever seen." Clara laughed. "All I did was play like I used to in my living room." "Exactly," he said. "That's why it mattered." The concert was recorded and later broadcast on television. More people saw it. More people heard her story. Clara didn't let the attention change her. She went back to her town, her little apartment, and her students. She kept teaching, kept playing, and kept living simply. But her story, her quiet comeback, was no longer just hers. It had become a message for others that it's never too late, that buried dreams can still breathe, that one moment of honesty can touch the entire world, and that sometimes the greatest music doesn't come from perfect fingers, but from a heart that never forgot how to feel. The excitement from the concert stayed in people's hearts for many weeks. People still talked about Claritha, the woman who had once lived a quiet, hidden life and had now touched the world through music. Her story had reached people far beyond. Her small town newspapers wrote about her. TV channels replayed her performance, but Clara herself remained calm. She didn't chase fame or attention. She simply returned home and continued doing what she loved. Her apartment was still the same, small, peaceful, filled with warmth. Her old notebook now sat open on the table most days, filled with new melodies she was writing. She kept her keyboard by the window where sunlight often fell across the keys. Each morning after breakfast, she would sit down to play, not for a crowd, not for applause, just for herself. But life around her had changed. More children began joining her music classes. At the community center, parents brought them from nearby towns, saying, "She's the one from the video." Clara welcomed them all with a smile. She didn't care where they came from. She only cared that they wanted to learn. She didn't just teach them notes or songs. She taught them how to feel the music, how to close their eyes and listen, how to trust their hearts. One boy in her class, named Arif, had trouble speaking. He didn't say much, and many thought he wasn't smart enough to learn music. But Clara noticed something special in him. She gave him a little more time, watched him closely, and slowly guided his hands on the keyboard. Weeks passed, and then, One day, while the other students were packing up to leave, Arif stayed behind. He sat at the keyboard and began to play a short, gentle tune Clara had taught him. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of feeling. Clara listened quietly, her heart full. That was her real success. Not the viral video, not the concert, but helping children like Arif find their own voice through music. As time went on, more good things happened. A local sponsor donated several new keyboards to her class. A music foundation reached out to her, offering her a small grant to open a music room for underprivileged children. Clara was shocked. She had never imagined something like this. She called the pianist to tell him the news. He answered with his usual warmth and joy. "I knew something beautiful would come out of this," he said. "I don't know what to say." Clara said, "This is more than I ever dreamed." "Then do what you've always done," he replied. "Keep it simple, keep it honest, just like your music." Clara decided to name the new program The Second Note, a place for children who had never had the chance to learn. For people who thought it was too late to begin again, for anyone who needed a second chance, she found a small building, not far from her home. It used to be a storage room, dusty and forgotten. But with help from friends and volunteers, she cleaned it up, painted the walls, brought in some rugs and chairs, and placed the new keyboards in a row. She hung a picture of her father on one wall, the man who had taught her music and told her, "Let your fingers tell the story." On the opening day of The Second Note, people from all over the town came to visit. Children laughed and played with the instruments. Parents stood in corners watching with pride. Clara gave a short speech, her voice soft but full of love. "This room," she said, "is not about being famous. It's not about being perfect. It's about remembering that music lives in all of us. Sometimes we just need a quiet place to let it speak." The room was filled with claps, cheers, and even a few tears. Clara didn't charge money for lessons. She accepted small donations, but her goal wasn't to earn it, was to give. She spent her days teaching children, her evenings writing music, and her weekends playing at the cafe where it all began. Yes, the same cafe. She still visited often. The piano had been fixed and polished. People would sometimes ask her to play, and she would sit down without hesitation, her fingers moving, like old friends across the keys. The cafe now had a small sign above the piano that read, "Where Dreams Woke Up." Tourists even began visiting, hoping to see the lady from the video. Some asked for pictures. Others just watched her play in silence. Clara never let the attention change her. She always smiled kindly, spoke gently, and stayed true to herself. The pianist visited every now and then. He would join her at the cafe for tea, and sometimes they would play a duet together. The two of them had become close friends, connected not just by music, by respect and shared understanding. One evening, after a long day of teaching, Clara sat alone at the community center, cleaning up the keyboards. The sun was setting, casting a golden light into the room. She looked around, feeling grateful for everything. Years ago, she had believed her story was over, that her music had ended quietly in a forgotten corner of her life. She never imagined that a single invitation to play would bring her to this moment. She remembered how nervous she had been that day, how she had almost said no. But then she remembered the feeling when her fingers first touched the keys. That moment had changed everything. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a girl she had never met. "Miss Clara, I saw your video. I'm 17, and I used to play piano too. I stopped because people said I wasn't good enough. But after watching you, I want to try again. Thank you for reminding me." Clara smiled. She replied simply, "It's never too late. Play from the heart. That's all that matters." As she locked up the center and stepped outside, the sky above was full of stars. The night was calm, and the air carried the soft scent of flowers. She walked slowly, not in a hurry, taking in every sound, every feeling she had once thought. Life had passed her by, but now she knew something true. Sometimes the most beautiful parts of a person's life don't happen when they're young or in the spotlight. Sometimes they happen later quietly, naturally, when no one is expecting them. When the world finally slows down enough to listen, and when That moment comes, even the softest melody can jolt the world, just like hers did.